Yo guys, we have made it to the end of Adventures. Today we will wrap up the first half of the Chronicles with the adventure of the Unspeakable Story. Now this is going to be a long one, because 1. This case is the second longest in the entire series, and 2. I'm going to comment on some other things about the earlier cases and delve more into the characters to conclude my overall thoughts on the game. Now before we start, I do want to say happy 20th anniversary to Ace Attorney. On the day I'm recording this, it is October 12th, 2021. So yeah, it's great that this series has been going on for so long, and I believe that it's gonna go on for longer, so that's really good. Now let's get back into the final case of adventures. So the final case is known for being that weird final case. It doesn't feel like a finale because it has so many unresolved plot points. Because of this, it feels more like a case 3 or a case 4 instead of a last one. A lot of people don't like this, but I disagree. If we just look at the premise and ideas, I think this works perfectly well as a final case, but we'll get into that later. For now, let's take a look at the investigation. So this investigation can be boring. I think it's an improvement over the case 4 investigation, but not by that much. Things take way too long to set up and get moving. For example, the different objects in the pawn shop. There's so much explanation dedicated to things like the stereoscope and security cameras when there really doesn't need to be. Let's take the stereoscope because that's the one I remember the most. When you arrive at the pawn shop, you have to examine it and you get an explanation of what it does. Then Iris or Holmes explains it to you a second time, even after you've examined it already. Then when you actually have to use it yourself, on the cat photo, you get another explanation. But it doesn't stop there because you get another explanation during the courtroom via the juror. Now I'll be honest, I didn't fact check any of what I said there. There may be details in there that are inaccurate, but that's how I felt about so many of the details, like the explanation for how the pawnbroker works and how the security cameras work. They just kept getting repeated, and that makes the investigation feel very slow. Also, we're in Sholmes' suite a lot, and if you watched the last video, you already know that I usually don't like the conversations that take place in that location. However, the one time I do like the place in this game is when Gina's there. I didn't talk about Gina that much in case 3, but I will say I do like her character a lot. She's interesting because she was an accomplice to McGilded, but she also had her own goals, with her helping other orphans like her by pickpocketing so they can all survive. Gina definitely makes the group dynamic more interesting. She starts pickpocketing from everyone, and everyone's just so interested in learning how to do it. She also brings out more from the other characters. Holmes has an interesting moment where he tells Iris that she can't publish The Hound of the Baskervilles, but won't tell Iris why. Gina gets mad and talks about how adults like Holmes are untrustworthy and gets Iris in a situation we've never seen before as she starts questioning Holmes' actions. We also have an interesting moment from Susato because she's hiding how she knew about the Hound of the Baskervilles in the first place. Sholmes is also suspicious as he diverts the conversation away from Susato, so these moments really make you think. On that note, I want to talk about Naruhodo's attic. I usually find the conversations in this room to be very fun. They usually take 2 or 3 characters and isolate them from the rest of the group, and there's another interesting moment from Susato where she hides a message she got from a telegram. I love all these moments of distrust. It doesn't change the group that much, but it at least makes some of the individual characters more interesting and gives you something to think about. Oh yeah, and we have another dance of deduction again, and it's boring. I already went over my complaints with this in case 4. It's way too long and wastes a lot of time for an uninteresting deduction. Essentially, I was waiting for a crime to take place, and that's a bad thing. It's fine if no murder happens for a long period of time, but if that's the case, I shouldn't be waiting for it because I'm really bored. I don't know how you guys felt, but sadly that's what happened for me. Thankfully, the investigation does pick up from the moment when Gina rejoins the sleepover. And that is what sets off an incredible series of events. I love everything about Sholmes getting shot by these 2 mysterious people, and then the discovery of Winnie Beck's body is very well done. I just love everything about the late night atmosphere of London, the character work, and that mysterious feeling you get when you enter the lit up pawn shop to the sinking feeling you get when you see Gina unconscious with the gun in her hand. The investigation of the crime isn't that fun, but I do like the conversations we have with Gina when she's in her cell. I like how it takes a lot of time to gain Gina's trust and how Gina's life in the East End plays into her mindset. I don't talk about the presentation too much, but I gotta give it credit here because the art here is a standout moment. I love this illustration of a silhouetted Magnus and Gina talking behind the snowy background of London. I don't know why I'm drawn to this image so much, but something about the style is just visually pleasing and it fits with the serious tone of the crime. Now there is something that confuses me about case 3. We get the reveal that Mr. Mason's blood is splattered all over Magnus's coat, but I have a problem with this reveal. First, we were informed that the defendant was only stabbed once. If he was stabbed once, the knife must have remained in his body the entire time. And if the knife was in his body the entire time, I can't believe that much blood would splatter onto Magnus's coat. First, if this was the case, there should be way more blood at the scene of the omnibus than we see in case 3. And second, we learned from previous games in the series that a knife acts as a stopper for the wound. There shouldn't be a considerable amount of blood on the coat if this was the case. Luckily, it doesn't impact the case too much, as this could easily be fixed by changing the amount of blood on the coat, but it is a detail I wanted to mention nonetheless. After some lawyer talk, Gina finally breaks down, and she allows us to be the lawyer. Overall, the investigation is a slight step up from case 4, since it has a lot of better moments, but it still suffers from the same pacing problem. However, the investigation is not the main attraction. No, because the trial is clearly where this case shines. I'm not even going to hide my feelings about this trial. This trial is easily one of my favorite trials in the entire series. First, let's talk about the characters. Nash and Ringo Skulkin are amazing witnesses. By minor character standards, these guys are definitely S tier. They show why multiple witnesses is such a great idea. Sure, they're normally just funny people by themselves, but they become even funnier when they use people like Gregson as their third lost brother. They actually made me understand why I found the witnesses in case 3 to be fun. All of those witnesses play off each other. An example is when Lady First and Fairplay realized that Beppo overcharged them. All of a sudden they start rioting, and moments like this can only happen when you have multiple witnesses. Nash and Ringo just do so many things that are unique. Now some people might hate the fact that we're at a final case, and their witnesses are just slipping up so easily. Sure, it is a convenient way to get the mystery moving, but they're immediately established to be not so smart, so it's natural that they mess up so much. It's a fresh idea for a pair of witnesses, and I think their moments of realizing what they did wrong are very funny. I also like some of their theatrics, like the reenacting of the gunshot. What I realized with the Skulkin brothers was that I didn't mind pressing statements all the time. That was one of my big complaints with the gameplay, but because these witnesses were so fun, I honestly didn't mind. I also like the jurors. We have Mr. Garadeb, who we already know, so it's fun when we try to convince him by bringing up past events. Also, it turns out Miss Garadeb wasn't wrong about Mr. Garadeb looking at younger women. That's a twist right there. Juror 2 is like a world building character who constantly talks about the world of London and how she perceives it. Juror 3 is the stereoscope maniac. Juror 4 is awesome because 1, he has that forgetful personality he had in case 4, but this time, he also uses his head to make verdicts, which is always a joy to see. Juror 5 is used well as she gets into arguments with Juror 3 about how bad stereoscopes are, and then we got the best juror in the entire series. Juror number 6. Making villain Bolshevik one of the jurors was such a good idea. This guy has some of the funniest lines in the entire game as he talks about his life in Russia and how he's always misjudged. Now let's get into the mystery. I want to start with the negative. This case has a problem of not explaining certain things in as much detail as I think it should. There are a lot of problems that can be clarified in 1 or 2 sentences, but oftentimes they are not, which makes the case more confusing than it should be. I'll give examples of this as we go on. It is worth noting that I really like the idea behind the mystery. In order to prove who the killer is, all you need to do is identify the different guns and bullets and find out who used which gun to shoot which person. The strength of keeping the case simple like this is that the burden of proof decreases. There's not a lot of different possibilities that the prosecutor can bring up to counter your arguments. So once you match a weapon to a person, you become very close to proving who killed Windybank. I also do like the mystery behind the angle of the bullet. The answer to how Windybank could have easily been shot by someone of the same height is clever. If he's running towards the storeroom, he would be leaning forward, and that would create an upward trajectory. However, I do have a problem with the mystery of the third bullet. It's really strange that Van Zieks or anyone else didn't think it was important to investigate Sherlock's pouch because it's scorched and one of the files is broken. It's a little contrived, and I think it could be better explained as well. Like, from my understanding, the glass fragments melted away, and the one that made the wound also fell back into the pouch to make them all disappear. At least that's what I think happened, but it isn't explicitly stated, and it does seem very coincidental. However, I do like what they do with the blood samples from Sherlock Holmes' technology. When I saw it being used in the investigation, I was concerned. This is some technology that hasn't been used, so I was hoping that it wouldn't work in court. It also had the problem of having a limited amount of shades that the blood could be. What I mean by that is there are many more people in this world than colors we can visibly differentiate. So even if there are two green bloodstains, how can we prove that they're from the same person? Thankfully, this is addressed by Van Zieks, and we only use the samples for the summation examination. I forgot to mention this during my review of The Runaway Room, but another reason why I believe the summation examination is so good is because you don't need a crazy amount of proof. You're just trying to convince the jurors, so you don't need to be concerned with proving every minuscule detail. I also do enjoy hearing what happened from Gina. It makes sense why she's only telling us now, because she did have her trust issues back then, and when she finally accepted her defense, visiting hours were over. Court also started before we could ask her anything in the morning, so I think it's fine that we only hear from Gina mid-trial. Her explanation of trying to go into the pawn shop to find out if the story was really there does a lot for her character. We see how far Gina goes in order to make sure that her friends don't get betrayed. Gina trying to understand how Ryunosuke can even trust her is another excellent moment. I like how her character doesn't automatically change after that final conversation in her jail cell. It makes her character arc feel a lot more believable. And to top it all off, I like how this explanation gives us more character to Pop Windybank. We see a very courageous side of his character, and he protects Gina and tries to stop the criminals. I really do like his character a lot. I think he's easily one of the best victims in the series. We got to see a lot more of him even before the crime happened, and he had many sides to him. He had his comical side, he had that sense of loyalty to his clients, and the side where he takes action and tries to fight the Skulkin brothers and Ashley Graydon. Now, this is where we have to talk about the downside of the jurors. Jurors 4, 5, and 6 all have a part to play in solving the case. Some might argue Juror 3 as well, but we already know about stereoscopes, so I don't think he helped at all. Now, Juror 4 was Sholmes' a surgeon, and Juror 6 had knowledge about bullets. I'm not too mad about Juror 4, because you could technically have him come in and testify about the bullet mid-trial. Having him on the jury is just an easy way to have him testify about the mystery of the bullet, or the surgeon's report could have been added to the evidence from the start of the trial, so it's very easy to think about another possible way that the coincidence can be fixed. Then you got Juror 6, who had the knowledge about the bullets, and again you can fix that easily by making someone else share a story about a similar incident like the judge or Van Zieks. But then you got Juror 5, working in the same communications office that Ashley Graydon worked in, and this is just the craziest coincidence that cannot be fixed. The fact that the story has to go off the coincidence that someone picked from the 6 million citizens of London just happened to be working at the same place that the culprit did is insane. Now there is a bit of questioning going on here, and I do like that. Ryunosuke does question how he's seeing the same people over and over again in this juror system, so I will forgive these coincidences in the Unspeakable Story. We can only hope that this is addressed in the Great Ace Attorney 2. I would also like Ryunosuke to question this more, because he only questions it one time in the case. Like, once the reveal that Ashley Graydon was working in the same office took place, Ryunosuke should have been thinking that there's something wrong with the juror selection but he doesn't. I won't take too much points off for this, since it does seem like this may be an unresolved plot point, but yeah, I wish more characters talked about this. Now, the cross-examination of Ashley Graydon does have a lot of filler. I don't really understand why we can't simply check his arm for the wound. We have to prove a lot of things before we're able to check his arm, and I don't recall you needing this much proof to do this in any other moment in the series. Luckily, the cross-examinations here are fun enough and I'm not bothered by the padding. It didn't slow down the case for me, so I was fine with it, but it is a small flaw. Eventually, the case does transform into something much bigger than a murder. We also have the objective of finding if something was stolen and the mystery of the government secrets. I honestly don't mind that the case is sidetracked here, because we're exploring other serious crimes, so it makes sense why the judge wants these solved. It also makes sense as to why Ryunosuke and Van Zieks want these solved as well. This case has connections to case 3, so it's only natural that both of them will be curious. The trial also continues to be engaging by changing up what happens. We get Gina to testify, which is not good, because she's gonna get arrested for perjury, but it's the only way forward. It's a really cool choice we have to make, albeit a tragic one. There's also something interesting going on with Ashley and Gregson. Now, Gregson has been another interesting character, along with Susato and Shomes, since he also seems to be hiding something throughout the trial. And now Ashley's getting dragged into something secretive as well. I also really like how all these events just build up these small but intriguing mysteries. Like, it's so investing when we're left on this cliffhanger of what's inside the box, because we want to know what McGilded and Mr. Milverton were up to. And then we finally hear these dotted music notes playing on the music box, and it just builds up more mystery because it doesn't sound like normal music. And we clearly know there's something big going on here as Ashley and Gregson start to panic. Speaking of Ashley Graydon, let's talk about the backstory of him and the Skulkins. I really do like their story of how they grew up poor, and their adventures such as the milk scam. It also just gives more character to all three of them. Nash and Ringo have this phase where they start getting angry about getting dragged into this large-scale crime, and we learn more about Ashley and how he hated being poor. Learning about his childhood makes his appearance and the way he carries himself a lot more interesting. This interesting story also carries over to the victim of case 3, Mason Milverton. We learn that Mason Milverton was struggling to earn a living to support Ashley and establish the connection between both people. That reminds me that another flaw of case 3 was that nobody questioned what the victim's full name was. It just wasn't stated for some reason, but at least we're getting to it here. Now let's talk about one of the most common talking points when it comes to the case: the peephole. My stance on this is that the whole issue with the peephole is just one giant mess. So first we got Holmes, who can just disguise himself as a bailiff for some reason. We're not told how he does it and how he gets away unnoticed, so it's a bad moment in my opinion. And then he brings us new evidence in the form of the cat door maker. And when this guy narrates how Susato had this ingenious plan of catching the culprit by planting a peephole at the scene, I was in shock from disbelief. Now, before I continue to rant about this peephole, I do want to say that Susato is my favorite character in this game, and by extension, my favorite character in the series. I already went over why I liked her so much in case 2, so let's talk about her character in case 3 and 4. Both case 3 and 4 bring more sides to Susato's character. She has her fierce moments where she stands up against Van Zieks. She has her mischievous moments, such as where she's driven by money. She has her serious moments, such as the one where she gets Gina to trust Ryunosuke before she leaves. She's really invested in learning about London, and she has other moments where she's the classic goofy assistant. Long story short, there's so many sides to her character to the point where she feels like one of the most human characters in the series. Case 5 also helped her character by making her more secretive, so we got this untrustworthy angle of Susato's character. One of these moments was the Hound of the Baskerville story, which is still a very intriguing, unresolved plot point. The other one is her secret conversation with Shomes. This is a moment that fails. It seems very interesting during the investigation, but it falls flat when you learn about it in the trial. Essentially, she somehow predicted that Graydon would learn about the peephole after it was made. Just think about that for a minute. How do you do that? Like, the only reason this plan worked was because Gregson had to cover the state secret for the police, and he colluded with Graydon by telling him the people existed. Like, what was Susato's thought process here? A simpler explanation that makes much more sense is that Susato made the people in a desperate attempt to see if Hatch and Gina were okay. And this is the explanation given later in the case. But we don't get it at the start for some reason. The game says that she made it because she foresaw something like this happening, which is a little ridiculous. It does become a little more believable when she explains her thought process at the end, but this seems like a forced attempt at having a moment where Susato is shown to be very smart and helpful. In my opinion, this is not a good moment for a character at all. She really doesn't need a big moment like this. She's already been shown as a capable assistant many times. Adding one more moment like this doesn't do anything. Again, Susato is still my favorite character, but this moment did rub me the wrong way, and it does a disservice to the case as a whole. Also, you can't prove when the peephole was made. All you can prove is that it was made from sometime between 1 AM and 1:30 AM. It's possible it was made before Graydon used it. You'd have to prove that Susato had the flatmaker the entire time. Like, what if Gina or Windybank made it beforehand and then Susato just carried it out of the store? It's not conclusive evidence at all. Well, let's go back to something more positive, because this is the only case in the game where the witness reaction mechanic is used well. Again, my problem with it in the other cases was that it didn't really do anything. Like, you just pursue them and then they add a statement. It's practically the same thing as a normal press. But here, there are interesting things done with the mechanic, and I'm convinced that the mechanic was added just for this case. So first we have Graydon and Gregson talking to each other, and if you pursue them, the case continues, but nothing comes out of it. Then you have Gregson pulling on Nash's shirt, and nothing comes out of that either. This is the first time this has happened, but then a few hours later, we discover the truth of what happened during these moments via word prompts and evidence, so it's a very interesting way to use the pursue mechanic, and I really do like it. Van Zieks also does a good job at prosecuting. Even if Ryunosuke makes up possibilities, he goes along with them and makes sure Ryunosuke can prove them step by step instead of just agreeing. We also see Van Zieks changing as he takes the defense side more and actually shows some belief that Ryunosuke is trying to do the right thing. We also have to talk about Inspector Gregson. I thought his introduction to the Clouded Kokoro was boring, but his character has a major improvement in the Unspeakable Story. It's interesting that the detective character actually aids the culprit in order to keep the secret of the music box away from the public. He has the dilemma of letting a culprit go free and sending an innocent girl to death, or his duty as an officer, and he chooses his duty, which is a very unexpected take on his character. Thankfully, we search Nash and get Gregson to confess by playing both discs on the music box, which is a very satisfying way to get a breakdown of both Gregson and Graydon. The music box also still holds its mystery, since we can hear the sounds, but we don't know what they're saying. It's another very intriguing moment. Obviously at this point, Gregson confesses that Graydon was the person who leaked the government secrets, so Graydon's basically done for. Overall, this is a competent mystery and story. Speaking of the story, I love the story of Ashley Graydon. Honestly, I think I just like any story relating to this big wealth gap in London. I love listening to Gina talk about her struggles, and the same thing applies to people like Graydon, the Skulkin Bros, and McGilded. Ashley Graydon put all his effort to get out of the slums, and those nightmares still haunt him today. Even though he has a high-paying job and can live comfortably, he still wants even more money because he fears going back to his childhood. There's even more interesting things that are never directly stated but implied, like how Mr. Mason still lives in the slums despite his son being rich. Ashley decided to not support his father financially, which further shows his hoarding mindset. But what's funny is, Graydon doesn't hate his father. After all, he was so enraged at his father's death that he avenged him by killing McGilded. No matter how rich he got, and how much he tried to run away from his childhood, he always went right back to it. He went back to his father to get the music discs made, and he went back to the Skulkin brothers to help him steal the disc. Another thing I found interesting was how Mr. Mason went to do the exchange. Of course he must have been suspicious because of the way the music discs were designed, but what caught my eye the most was Mr. Mason's threat. He tells Ashley that if he's not allowed to do the exchange with McGilded, he won't take his payment for making the discs. This is the key. He used his payment as the threat, which shows that Mr. Mason knows Ashley cares about him, even though Ashley didn't take him out of the slums. The mystery of what happened to the omnibus that day is still left a little ambiguous. We don't get to hear the exact words exchanged by Mason and McGilded, and that's what makes the death even more tragic for Graydon. The murder of Windybank is also tragic. Now, I have seen a lot of confusion related to this incident, and I do believe the game could have explained this better, but I'll summarize it now just in case anyone is confused. Nash and Ringo were searching the counters and Graydon was searching the shelves. Graydon found the disc and he went near the calendar area to either look at Nash and Ringo fighting Windybank, or he just wanted to tell them to leave the shop. He then gets shot by Windybank, and then next part is where the explanation is very poor. Graydon says that before he even knew what was happening, he shot back, and apparently he never intended to fire in Windybank's direction. This makes it sound like he shot from where he was standing, but it would be impossible to shoot Mr. Windybank from that angle. He must have ran up to where Nash and Ringo were in order to shoot Windybank. This is where statements like, "I didn't realize what was going on," or "I never intend to fire" at the pawnbroker's direction can confuse people, because by running towards the storeroom area and shooting at the open door, it makes it seem like the crime couldn't be an accident. I think what the game was trying to say with Graydon was that he didn't even realize what he was doing. His body was almost moving on his own. While Windybank ran away, Graydon was running towards him in a panic state and shot him. In a sense, it's exactly like Nicolina's crime. It's a murder, but also in a way, it's an accident. We then get a scene where Ashley Graydon realizes that he's become like McGilded. I think it's a very powerful scene. Now, some people do think it's weird to equate Graydon to McGilded, and I do think it's true that they are not equally evil. However, we can't deny that Ashley Graydon shares many similarities to McGilded. At first, Ashley gets a respectable job, but he then resorts to criminal activity to get more money, just like McGilded. He also killed someone, even if it wasn't completely on purpose, and even more importantly, he still tried to frame someone innocent for the crime. Not only that, what's most interesting is the background of both characters. In case 3, McGilded said he knows what it feels like to live in the slums. If we take his words to be the truth, then McGilded may just be another person who grew up poor and was corrupted by money later in his life. If we take it one step further, McGilded may have been very similar to Graydon in the fact that he made money honorably, but dug himself more and more into criminal activity as he kept getting richer. That's just speculation, but I completely understand why Van Ziek says Ashley Graydon has become the very monster he saw in McGilded. With the case being done, we still have a few more moments to review before we can rate the case. First, we got Van Ziek's approval of Ryunosuke's talent, and his shock at how Ryunosuke is a good Japanese person. We get left with a cliffhanger where we learn that Van Ziek hates Japanese people because of a certain Japanese man in his past. We also got Gina being able to say what she thinks, which is a great payoff at the end. I also gotta give credit to Ryunosuke. Ryunosuke's arc as a nervous lawyer to a confident one is masterfully done. You can't see a huge change in him from case to case. However, if you compare who he is in case 1 and who he is in case 5, you'll see a huge difference. I don't know how Takumi did this, but he did it very well. I think a lot of characters in any kind of media fall into the trap of getting development very suddenly or too quickly. The characters do a 180 when it doesn't feel realistic, and that feels awkward when you're playing the game. Thankfully, Ryunosuke is the exact opposite. Also, we can't forget that amazing cliffhanger at the end, when we transcribe the Japanese Morse code and find the 4 names. 3 of them really stick out as very interesting. We got Kazuma Sogi, Tobias Gregson, and John H. Wilson. The cliffhanger is a really strong and intriguing one that just makes you theorize about what's going on. We send off Susato to a beautiful scene of the group looking at Susato sailing away in the sunset. And then we close with our protagonist getting into trouble Ace Attorney scene to finish the Great Ace Attorney 1. First of all, let's give this case a rating. I give this one an 8.5. It is a really great case. I love this one. The main thing holding it back is the investigation. That investigation can get really boring at times, and yeah, I just felt myself getting tired a lot in the investigation. But that trial, oh man, in terms of pure entertainment value, this is easily one of the best trials in the series. Yes, it's long, but they make it really fun. I was invested from beginning to the end. The characters were all top notch. Just like in case 2, I think every character in this case was fantastic. This includes all main characters and side characters. The story being told in this case was also really well done. I love this government secret side plot going on, along with a very personal group plot going on with the characters like Gina, Susato, Shomes, and Iris. The story of Ashley Graydon and how that tied back to case 3 was also phenomenal. There are a few missteps in the trial, but it really elevates the case from what was a very mediocre investigation. Now, that doesn't mean we're done. I do want to wrap up my thoughts on this game as a whole and discuss the big talking point of case 5. Case 5 is infamously known for not feeling like a normal final case. The mystery and story here isn't what you'd expect for a finale. The case itself felt connected to only case 3. The mystery wasn't crazy, it was just a shooting at a pawnbrokery. The main villain is not a person of power, it's just Ashley Graydon. But honestly, I find this so refreshing. It gets boring when we have the same plot of all these cases connecting together to lead to some big bad with these ridiculous high stakes, and these type of plots keep getting used over and over again in Ace Attorney. This was a much needed refresher, and I think it was actually more intense than a lot of those other final cases, despite not being a grand scale finale. Again, I also like how personal it felt, not just for Ryunosuke but for all the characters. It felt like everyone was really involved in what happened. Now, I think the biggest talking point is the amount of unresolved plot points there are. I've heard a lot of people say that they felt empty inside when they finished the game because so many things are just left unsolved. And I've heard a lot of people say that The Great Ace Attorney 1 isn't a good standalone game and it needs The Great Ace Attorney 2 to make it retroactively better. This is actually a much bigger thing for the Japanese audience. Like, from my understanding, the Japanese audience hates case 5 of this game because it just didn't resolve everything. I even read in an interview where one of the staff members were crying because of the amounts of complaints they got about the game being bad just because it didn't address all of these cliffhangers. I disagree with this viewpoint entirely. I think all these unresolved cliffhangers made this game a lot better. It was so interesting for me when I just thought about all the questions left unanswered, and my mind was just thinking about every possible answer to these questions I had, and I love that. To me, The Great Ace Attorney 1 is a good standalone game because it still resolves what it needs to. Like, all the main incidents from case 1 to 5 were resolved. It's just certain plot points like the Reaper and the Morse code at the end that are left in the dark, which again, I'm completely fine with. There are still some things with the McGilded plotline that are still not fully answered, but again, we have to wait and see what The Great Ace Attorney 2 does with that. The game gives more than enough information to where you can speculate about what happened, and I'm satisfied with that. I don't really understand how people feel empty from the cliffhangers, and I don't think I ever will. It's just something that personally never bothered me. Like, when I watched the fan translation all those years ago, I literally thought The Great Ace Attorney Adventures was the best standalone game in the series. Yes, I knew The Great Ace Attorney Resolve would answer some questions left from Adventures, but I wasn't mad that I had to wait many years for the answers to those questions. Now, about my initial opinion of this being the best game in the series, do I hold on to that opinion? Well, if you've seen my ranking of the cases, you know the answer is no. So why is that? Why was this my favorite Ace Attorney game back then, but not now? There can be many reasons for this. The first reason is time. Again, it's been a really long time since I've watched a Let's Play of the game. I'd say it's anywhere between 3 to 5 years, and in that large time span, my opinions can change a lot. What I might have liked back then may not be what I like now, and what I've hated back then may not be what I hate now. The second reason would be the fact that I'm actually playing the game instead of watching someone play it. The pacing would be quicker when I'm watching someone play it because they know what they're gonna do from the get-go. They don't need to press every statement because they already know the fastest possible method to progress with each testimony, which makes the game feel more quick and concise. I also think a part of why I like this game more in the past is that I wasn't thinking about the game too much as I was watching it. Every case in the game has some contrivances to make it work, and some of them have a lot, but this wasn't something I was thinking about back then. I just sort of went along with the game instead of taking any time to question it. And finally, I do think the fan translation may have played a part in making the game better for me. Now, this is just a possibility. I'm not saying the fan translation is definitely the better experience. I'm not in a position to say that because I don't remember the changes between the translations too well. It's just another possibility for why I used to think that this game was the best in the series. Case 2 and 5 are actually really good, and I'd consider them to be among the best cases in the series. My opinion of those two cases actually went up. Case 2 went up a lot, and Case 5 went up a little. But Case 1, 3, and 4 all went down a lot for me. They were all lacking in certain departments, and made the game much weaker than I initially thought it was. I think the biggest issues with this game were the pacing and logic. Those were the two big weak points, while the two big strong points were the characters and the individual stories in every case. Overall, I say the Great Ace Attorney 1 is a good game, but I'd say it's weaker than Ace Attorney 1. So that's all, but of course we're not done with the Great Ace Attorney because we have a second game to review. I might be taking a little break here because these reviews did take a lot of time, and I have to take another look at the cases in the Great Ace Attorney Resolve. So stay tuned for my reviews, and see you all then.